Chapter 128, The Pequod Meets the Rachel. Next day a large ship, the Rachel, was descried, bearing directly down upon the Pequod, all her spars thickly clustering with men. At the time the Pequod was making good speed through the water, but as the broad-winged windward stranger shot nigh her, the boastful sails all fell together as blank bladders that are burst, and all life fled from the smitten hull. "Bad news, she brings bad news," muttered the old Manxman. But ere her commander, who, with trumpet to mouth, stood up in his boat, ere he could hopefully hail, Ahab's voice was heard. "Hast seen the white whale? Ah, yesterday. Have ye seen a whaleboat adrift?" Throttling his joy, Ahab negatively answered this unexpected question, and would then have fain boarded the stranger when the stranger captain himself, having stopped his vessel's way, was seen descending her side. A few keen pulls in his boat hook soon clinched the Pequod's main chains, and he was sprang to the deck. Immediately he was recognized by Ahab for a Nantucketer he knew, but no formal salutation was exchanged. "Where is he? Not killed, not killed?" cried Ahab, closely advancing. "How was it?" It seemed that somewhat late on the afternoon of the previous day, while three of the stranger's boats were engaged with a shoal of whales, which had led them some 4 or 5 miles from the ship, and while they were yet in swift chase to the windward, the whale's hump and head of Moby Dick was suddenly loomed up out of the water, not very far to the leeward, whereupon the fourth-rigged boat, a reserved one, had instantly been lowered in the chase. After a keen sail before the wind, this fourth boat, the swiftest keeled of all, seemed to have succeeded in fastening, at least, as well as a man at the masthead could tell anything about it. In the distance he saw the diminished dotted boat, and then a swift gleam of bubbling white water. After that, nothing more, whence it was concluded that the stricken whale must have indefinitely run away with his pursuers, as often happens. Yet there was some apprehension, no positive alarm as yet. The recall signals were placed in the rigging, darkness came on, and forced to pick up her three far too windward boats ere going in the quest of the fourth one in the precise opposite direction. The ship had not only necessitated to leave the boat to its own fate near midnight, but for the time to increase her distance from it. But the rest of her crew being at last safe aboard, she crowded all sails, stunsail on stunsail, after the missing boat, kindling a fire in her trypots for a beacon, and every other man aloft in the lookout. But though she had thus sailed a sufficient distance to gain the presumed place of the absent ones when last seen, though she then paused to lower her spare boats to pull all around her, and not finding anything, had again dashed on, again paused, and lowered her boats, and though she had thus continued doing till daylight, yet not least glimpse of the missing keel had been seen. The story told, the stranger captain immediately went on to reveal his object on boarding the Pequod. He desired that ship to unite with his own in the search, by sailing over the same sea some 4 or 5 miles apart on parallel lines, and so sweeping a double horizon, as it were. "I will wager something now," whispered Stubb to Flask, "that someone in that missing boat wore off the captain's best coat, mayhap, and his watch. He's so cursed anxious to get it back. Whoever heard of 2 pious whale ships cruising after one missing whaleboat in the height of the whaling season? See, Flask, I only see how pale he looks, pale in the very buttons of his eyes. Look, it wasn't his coat, it must have been the... My boy, my own boy is among them. For God's sake, I beg, I conjure." Here exclaimed the stranger captain to Ahab, who thus far had but icily reserved his petition. "For 48 hours let me charter your ship. I'll gladly pay for it, and roundly pay for it, if there be no other way. For 48 hours only. Only that, you must. Oh, you shall do this thing." "His son," cried Stubb. "Oh, it's his son he's lost. I take back the coat and watch. What says Ahab? We must save the boy." "He's drowned with the rest of 'em last night," said the old Manx sailor standing behind them. "I heard, all of ye heard their spirits." Now it was shortly turned out what made this incident of the Rachel's more melancholy was a circumstance that not only was one of the captain's sons among the missing boat's crew, but among the number of the other boat's crews at the same time, but on the other hand separated from the ship during the dark vicissitudes of the chase. There had been still another son, as for that time the wretched father was plunged to the bottom of the cruelest perplexity, which was only solved for him by his chief mates instinctively adopting the ordinary procedure of a whale ship in such emergencies. That is, when placed between jeopardized but divided boats, always pick up the majority first. But the captain, for some unknown constitutional reason, had refrained from mentioning all this, and not till forced to by Ahab's iceliness did he allude to his one yet missing boy, a little lad but 12 years old, whose father, with the earnest but unmisgiving hardihood of a Nantucketer's paternal love, had thus early sought to initiate him into the perils and wonders of a vocation almost immemorial, the destiny of all his race. Nor does it infrequently occur that Nantucket captains will send a son of such tender age away from them, for a protracted 3 or 4 years' voyage in some other ship than their own, so that their first knowledge of a whaleman's career shall be unenervated by any chance display of a father's natural but untimely partiality, or undue apprehensiveness and concern. Meantime, now the stranger was still beseeching this poor boon of Ahab, and Ahab still stood like an anvil, receiving every shock, but without the least quivering of his own. I will not go, said the stranger, till you say aye to me. Do to me as you would have me do to you in like the case. For you too have a boy, Captain Ahab, though but a child, and nestling safely at home now, a child of your old age too. Yes, yes, you relent. I see it. Run, run, men, now, and stand by to square in the yards. Avast, cried Ahab, touch not a rope yarn. Then in the voice that prolongingly molded every word, Captain Gardner, I will not do it. Even now I lose time. Goodbye, goodbye. God bless ye, man, and may I forgive myself, but I must go. Mr. Starbuck, look at the binnacle watch, and in 3 minutes from this present time instant, warn off all strangers. Then brace forward and let the ship sail as before. Hurriedly turning with averted face, he descended into his cabin, leaving the strange captain transfixed at this unconditional and utter rejection of his so earnest suit. But starting from his enchantment, Gardner silently hurried to the side, fell more fell than stepped into his boat and returned to his ship. Soon the two ships diverged their wakes, and long as the strange vessel was in view, she was seen to yaw hither and thither in every dark spot, however small, on the sea. This way and that, where her yards were swung round, starboard and larboard, she continued to tack. But now she beat against a head sea, and again it pushed her before it. And all the while her masts and yarns were thickly clustered with men, as 3 tall cherry trees when the boys are cherrying among the boughs. But by her still halting course and winding woeful way, you plainly saw that this ship, so wept with spray, still remained without comfort. She was Rachel, weeping for her children, because they were not. This is the end of chapter 128. The she was Rachel weeping for her children because they were not is a line from the Bible. In Genesis, you have Abraham, who had a son Isaac, who had a son Jacob. Jacob had 12 children, or 12 sons. He had daughters as well. He had 12 sons by 4 different women. Rachel, his favorite, had 2, Joseph and Benjamin. Now, Joseph was his father's favorite because Rachel was his favorite wife. And so Joseph was the favorite, and the brothers, his older brothers, were all jealous of him. And so they threw him in a pit and sold him off into slavery. They talked about killing him. And they were like, oh, how do we hide the body? How do we do this? And it's like, well, just sell him. So they sold him into slavery down into Egypt. And then Joseph ended up being prosperous down in Egypt. He rose from being a slave to being second in command to the Pharaoh through hard work and the blessings of God. So Joseph was just totally blessed in Egypt. and he thought he was dead. And or everybody, or his brothers knew that they sold him into slavery. They assumed that he either died in slavery or something, um, but his father thought he was dead. His mother thought he was dead. So a famine came on the land, and Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt to try and buy some grain. And Joseph was like, "Hey, these are my brothers. Let's play a trick." So he sold them the grain and then put the money back in the bags. So he didn't take money for the grain. And this was actually part of how Joseph became so prosperous, because he had the Pharaoh got a vision from God saying, "Okay, there's going to be this huge famine, but you're going to have 7 years of plenty beforehand." Joseph interpreted the dream and stocked up all of the grain from those 7 years, and just was selling it off and being profitable and looking ahead. So Joseph gave the grain to his brothers, gave them back their money, but didn't tell them. And they came back, they got home, they opened up the grain, said, "Hey, Dad, went to Egypt, got grain." They didn't recognize Joseph because he was looking Egyptian. He was dressed like an Egyptian and acted like an Egyptian and spoke like an Egyptian because he had been in Egypt for 20 years. And so, well, maybe not 20 years, but he'd been in Egypt for a while. So he looked and spoke and talked like an Egyptian. He walked like an Egyptian. Walk Like an Egyptian is a song by the Bangles from the 80s. Great song. Anyway, so he walked like an Egyptian. And so his brothers didn't recognize him. They came back. They had the grain. They're like, "Yay." And they had the money. And they're like, "Oh, man, we are so in trouble." I'm like, "Okay." And Joseph said, when he sent them away with the grain, he said, "Is this all of you?" And they're like, "No, we have one son. My father has one other son. He's like the favorite." And, Joseph's like, "Look, if you want more grain, everybody's got to come back." So the brothers are like, "Oh, okay." So the next trip down for grain, because this drought went on for 7 years, next trip down for grain, they brought Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, the other son of Rachel. And so brought along Benjamin. And Joseph, once again, gave them the grain, hid the money in the thing. But this time, he hid a cup of his inside of Benjamin's bag. And so they went away. They headed back. And then Joseph sent the Egyptian army after his brothers. He's like, "You stole from me. I welcomed you to my house, and you stole from me." And they searched the bags. They found the cup. And the oldest brother's like, "No, don't let... I'll come back. I'll give you my children. I'll stay here. You can have my children. You can kill them. You can kill me. Just let Benjamin go." And Joseph and the Egyptians were like, "No, he's going to stay here with us. Bring your dad." And so then this word gets back to gets back to Isaac. Word gets back to Isaac. And word gets back to Rachel. And Rachel is like, she had 2 kids. Her older sister Leah had like 4. Bildad and Zilpah had 3 each or something like that. But, here was Rachel, and it was only her children, and she was without children for a long time. So, she loved these children. They were extremely precious to her because, she had problems getting these 2 children, and so she just loved them dearly. And Rachel weeping for her children because they were not, because she thought that Joseph and Benjamin were dead. So that was Rachel weeping for her children. So the name of the boat, the Rachel, it's perfectly normal. Name the boat the Rachel, name it after a wife, name it after a girlfriend, name it after a daughter. So, it's normal to name the boat Rachel. But in this case, the word Rachel has the hidden meaning because the captain went with his young son, and the young son was on the boat that went away, or that was sailed off. Now, it's interesting that he had this problem, and it looks like he has a nicer and faster ship than Ahab's Pequod. The Pequod was old, and the other ship was described as faster and better. So here you have this other captain, and in many ways he's all set up to do this. But previously, the Pequod, there were 4 boats, all 4 boats out from the ship, all out with whales. What'd they do? They hung a lantern and they just sat and they waited. They're like, okay, we'll get this at dawn. And everybody rowed back, and they didn't scatter far. But in this case, the white whale went off, carried off a boat, and they went off in the direction to get the other 3, as opposed to getting the one. And one was windward and the other one was downwind. Now it sounds like the wind has shifted some because the ship is going upwind to try and get to the other boat. So I'm not sure about that. But, here you have Moby Dick. They're within sight of him. And I don't know. If I were Ahab, I probably would have gone in the search for the other boat from the Rachel, because Moby Dick carried off the other boat. So if Moby Dick carried off that other boat, probably means he's nearby that other boat, rather than just going in a direction of, well, this is where he normally is. It's like, wait a minute, he was seen going that way. How about we go that way to get Moby Dick? And, with 2 boats, they have a better chance of getting him because, it's a dangerous, dangerous whale.